joining us online and in the room for our event today, Veterans Voices. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Airlines for America, for their support of this important event. We are here today to amplify veterans' voices from across the country, highlighting their transitions from military life to the workplace environment, their accomplishments and struggles, and their real-life stories as a tribute to their service. As the veteran population has been declining steadily over the years, the Hill's Veterans Voices show salutes the veterans across the country and will dive into such important topics. How can we better value our veterans at home and at work? What more can policymakers in Washington do to improve the lives who have served? How can the private sector and communities across the country create pathways to opportunities for veterans and their families? Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. If you're with us here in the room, please turn your phones onto silent for the duration of our program, but please join the conversation on social media. You can follow us on X, Facebook, and Instagram at The Hill Events using the hashtag veterans. And with that, I am delighted to begin our program with our first interview. Please welcome the Hill's Editor-in-Chief, Bob Cusack, and Congressman Seth Moulton, member of the Armed Services Committee. Good morning.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Congressman, for joining us.
You're welcome.
Let's start off with the obvious question. There was an election last week. What happened? And where do Democrats go from here?
Well, we got wiped out, is what happened across the board. And I think it is an opportunity for Democrats to figure out how to reconnect with a lot of American voters that we've clearly lost touch with and chart a new path forward. We can't keep doing the same thing we're doing. We've got to have a new strategy. And I've been trying to foster that conversation over the past few days in the party. But there's got to be a lot of soul searching, and there's got to be a lot of looking in the mirror and just honestly saying, where have we lost touch?
What do you think a Trump administration means for veterans?
Well, I think it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag from what little we know right now.
Okay.
I've worked very closely with Mike Waltz, the new national security advisor. He and I have traveled together to the Pacific to try to understand the China challenge better, for example. I think that he's a trustworthy partner. Now, to be fair, he's really, catered to, which is a polite way to put it, Trump over the past couple years. It seems to have paid off for him. But I do think that fundamentally he's smart, he's thoughtful, he's relatively bipartisan. I've been able to work with him on a variety of issues, and that's exactly the kind of person you need in that position. He's a veteran. He was in the National Guard, and that gives him a perspective on veterans issues. Pete Hegseth was just announced last night as the new Secretary of Defense. I think he's going to try very hard to politicize the military. That's been his MO at Fox News and in his variety of positions since he got out of the National Guard as well. And so that's not going to be a good influence, but he does care about veterans. Clearly, Pete is someone who cares about veterans. But you put those two in contrast with the draft dodger who's our new commander-in-chief, who clearly doesn't respect veterans, as his senior military advisors have told us unequivocally. And some Republicans like to dismiss that. No, that's just the facts. He doesn't respect veterans. He doesn't respect especially wounded veterans. He clearly thought it was better for him to stay home so that someone else could go to Vietnam in his place. So at a fundamental level, the commander-in-chief does not respect veterans, but he's going to be surrounded by some advisors who do.
What do you hear from veterans across the country? What are their biggest challenges and needs?
Well, I think that it's amazing to look at some broad statistics at veterans. Veterans are disproportionately Fortune 500 CEOs. They have average lifetime earnings that are higher than non-veterans. They're more civically involved. They're leaders in our community. Veterans are also disproportionately homeless. They have higher suicide rates. They have higher drug addiction rates. So how do you get this bifurcation, right? You have many veterans who are extraordinarily successful and some who are literally on the streets. Well, I think a lot of that just comes back to the transition. And as a Marine veteran myself, getting out after 4 tours in the infantry in Iraq, I had some amazing opportunities. I was able to go to grad school, and yet I still found the transition very difficult. So I think a lot of veteran issues come back to whether you can navigate that transition successfully or not. Because if you navigate it successfully, then you take your leadership experience leading in literally the most difficult environment on earth and turn it into success back home. But if you don't navigate that transition successfully, if you don't deal with issues like post-traumatic stress, which I had to deal with, if you don't figure out how to turn your education benefits into a way to transition into the civilian life, if you come back to broken families and you just can't sort of get out of that spiral, then you might literally end up addicted to drugs and on the street. And so my veterans work in Congress has been focused on that initial point. We need to deal with veterans homelessness, but I'd rather deal with it by just focusing on the transition that leads to that rather than dealing just exclusively with the problem itself. Does that make sense?
It does, but I got to follow up on that. As far as your transition, what was the most difficult part of it? You mentioned you have PTSD. I want to talk a little bit about that. Was that part of it?
I call it post-traumatic stress because as a Marine that I served with said to me, and we served in the same platoon, Seth, after what we went through, it would be a disorder if you weren't affected by it.
Okay.
And so I've done a lot of work on veterans' mental health after I became the first sitting member of Congress to talk openly about my own mental health issues, which has been like a death sentence in politics for a long time, even though we know that some of our most famous American politicians in history had mental health issues. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, maybe the best president ever, struggled with lifelong depression. And if you look at what President H.W. Bush, President Kennedy have said about their experience in World War II, they probably were dealing with some symptoms of post-traumatic stress as I was. Now, I had a relatively minor case, which for a long time made me dismiss it and say, I don't need help, I'm fine. Look at these guys who, can't even get out of bed in the morning. They're the ones who really need the attention. And frankly, that was wrong. That was wrong. And it took talking to fellow veterans to recognize that I had some symptoms and it would be better to deal with them, which I did. But the long story here is that was before I got to Congress. And when I ran, I kept it completely secret. I mean, no one on my team, maybe one person, knew that I even dealt with a mental health issue because this was like the biggest skeleton in my closet. Right? Because I thought it would completely derail my chances of even just getting elected to Congress. But that's not leadership by example. And the Marines preach leadership by example. So after a few years, I said, nope, I need to talk about this because it might help other people. I didn't know if my career in politics might end that night. But instead, it's kind of launched me on this mental health crusade, and I co-authored the bill to establish 988, now the National Mental Health Hotline, with a fellow veteran, an Air Force veteran from Utah, Chris Stewart, incidentally, a world record-holding Air Force veteran. I think he flew around the planet faster than anyone else. I do not hold any world records in the Marine Corps, but we were able to get this really significant piece of legislation passed that's helping a lot of veterans and a lot of ordinary Americans who are dealing with mental health issues across the country.
And I want to talk about 988 because I think that's one of the best things I've ever seen government do. But tell us about the veteran component of that. A veteran calls that line, which it's obviously a lot more memorable than whatever the old line was.
Right.
What happens?
Well, you're going to get, I think it's literally you press 1, you get connected directly to the Veterans Crisis Line, which has trained operators, trained people who understand how to deal with these issues, but can speak specifically to veterans. And actually, one of the features of 988 is we're really trying hard to get these specific options open for a variety of people. So, if you call because you're getting insulted at school because you're LGBTQ, you're going to talk to someone who can speak specifically to those issues. If you call and you speak Spanish, you're going to speak specifically to someone who speaks Spanish. In fact, we're dramatically expanding the language component. So I don't remember how many languages we're up to now, but we're trying to make sure that no matter what language you speak, you can talk to someone in your native language. So there are a lot of ways that we're making the line more specific. But really, the first way was to make sure that veterans could get help from someone who's trained to speak to veterans' issues.
Going back to your mental health struggles, and so many have them, whether they're veterans or not. Do you think that stigma has changed, maybe post-COVID?
Absolutely. I don't know what changed it, but I mean, I shared this story before COVID. And like I said, I thought it could end my political career. Instead, people were really receptive. And I've had people come up to me all over the country and say, Seth, thank you for sharing your story because it's helped me share mine. And maybe the most shocking piece for me was, I mean, it's amazing. You go to like a VFW, I remember in Las Vegas, and a Vietnam veteran came up to me and said, I have struggled with post-traumatic stress since Vietnam, and I've never talked about it. I'm going to go get help now. I'm going to go talk to the VA. Mm-hmm. But I also had people on my own staff who I never knew had mental health issues who opened up and said, actually, you know, I've got this too. So the best part about talking about my own story is it's helped enable other people to talk about theirs. And that's really how we end the stigma. Because you soon realize that everybody is connected to someone who has a mental health issue very intimately. It's so widespread. And some of them serious, some of them more minor. But whether you have it yourself or a close family member or a friend has a mental health issue, it's something we should be able to talk about openly.
So the reaction completely surprised you?
Honestly, it did. I thought it was the right thing to do, but I thought there would be way more backlash, way more damage control that I would have to do. And instead, it's really been extraordinarily positive. I mean, it's still a stigma, though, right? You know, if I told you that after this I've got to go for my annual physical, no one would say, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong with you, Seth?" Right. But if I told you that I was going to a mental health appointment after this, you might be thinking, you know, is everything okay? So we've got a long way to go to get to the point where mental health is the same as physical health. We do preventative care. We just have regular checkups to make sure you don't have any issues regardless of whether you actually seem to be sick. I mean, that's where we need to get to, and we have a bit of a roadmap to do so. But there still is a stigma in America today. I think it's important to acknowledge that. We've come a long way, but we haven't solved the problem.
My brother, years ago, did a documentary about someone who came back from Iraq, a veteran, and then, you know, fell through the cracks, became homeless. And also one of the issues that film highlighted was just loneliness. You say you talked to former colleagues. How can veterans watching this, you know, what are the programs that you think are the most effective, and how do they do it? Because it's so daunting, especially when you're dealing with an issue like healthcare, VA healthcare. I mean, a healthcare system, no matter what the system is, so complicated.
It's a really good point because I think a lot of people think of post-traumatic stress as only the most extreme cases, right? Well, where you're addicted to drugs, you can't get out of bed in the morning, or whatever the symptoms might be. But I found, has anyone read Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe? A few people. This is a book about transitioning from war, but it spoke very personally to me because it talked about mental health issues that were more about just what it means to not have the camaraderie of your team, what it means to come back to a life that's so mundane and inconsequential compared to the work that you were doing overseas. And that kind of transition, including just loneliness. You know, you're used to being a part of this amazing team, doing some of the most difficult work in the world, and now you're home. And you know, I was going to grad school. That was a great opportunity, but it felt pretty meaningless, to be honest. You know, sitting in the back of a classroom at Harvard, great opportunity, but God, compared to what my friends were still doing in Iraq or Afghanistan, this is like this doesn't mean much. And so there are a lot of different ways in which the transition can be difficult. But the best part about talking about these issues as veterans is veterans can also, I think, set an example for the rest of the country. In fact, even we mentioned preventative mental health care. Some of our elite special forces are doing mindfulness training right now, which is a form of sort of preventative mental health care, because it helps them do their jobs better. And that's a great example to set for everybody else.
As far as last question, it's a big loaded question, but over the next 10 years,
we like loaded questions.
Yeah. Where, you know, I think that the treatment of veterans' mental health has come a long way over the last decade. But what's the next decade's challenges, especially with military challenges across the globe? I mean, honestly, President Trump was elected because of domestic issues, but he's got a lot of foreign policy challenges. And
a lot of foreign policy.
Hopefully not more wars, but some conflicts, potentially.
Yeah, and some things that could turn into wars pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Xi Jinping could invade Taiwan and start World War III in the Pacific. Ukraine could go nuclear, or Putin could get the message that he's going to get away with Ukraine and therefore go after a NATO country next, which means U.S. boots on the ground. I mean, it is a dangerous world. I think we've got to be honest about that. But back home with veterans care, specifically on mental health, There's a couple things we need to do. 988 dramatically increased access to emergency care because now everyone knows you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't need to find a phone book. If you or a loved one has a mental health crisis, you just dial 988. But then what happens next? Because it turns out that after you get that intervention, which by the way is saving thousands of lives a month, by some estimates, 95% of the calls received to 988 result in a life-saving intervention. So think about that. Think about how many people are calling 988 and just it's literally saving their lives. But you don't get cured like that, right?
Right.
You know, you don't fix a broken ankle just by getting a Band-Aid. So what needs to happen next is you have to have follow-on care with a therapist. It's very hard to find mental health appointments. We don't have enough providers. I've also worked on increasing mental health access to active duty members to try to head off some of these problems before they become veterans. We need to do more to make sure that service is accessible when you're on active duty, no matter where you are in the world. And ultimately, we've got to get to this point where it is so normalized that we're doing preventative mental health care and not just responsive or reactive mental health care. In the same way you go to a physical and might say, you know, you're fine, but you could lose a little weight. You know, are you exercising enough? That's where we need to get with mental health care. And that ultimately will make the veterans community stronger and safer. It'll make our active duty forces more effective. And I think we'll be a stronger nation.
We've run out of time. Please thank the Congressman for joining us this morning. Hey, thanks so much. Well done, Thanks.
Please welcome to the stage Republican Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas, current ranking member of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee.
Senator, how are you?
Good morning.
Hey, thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Big day on Capitol Hill. Thanks for joining us because I know you got a leadership race, you got a lot of transition stuff going on. How does it all feel? I'll ask you the same question. What happened last week? What was your read on it? Obviously, maybe a different take than the Congressman.
Bob, I would tell you that I'm not anxious to leave, so you can take this long if you'd like. What's going on in the Capitol is certainly interesting, but it becomes very personal for those in the room. But I'm delighted to be back in Washington, D.C. for purposes of reorganizing the Congress. My take on the election is there are just a lot of Americans out there who feel like themselves, their families, their kids and grandkids aren't as well off as they want them to be. They're concerned about kind of the values that are pushed upon them. And it also, I would say that my take from this election is that the prognosticators, the pollsters, the analysts didn't have a very good clue of what was going on in the country. And there's just a lot of people out there who speak when they voted. And seem somewhat, important for us to be paying attention to. I shouldn't say somewhat. That sounds too lessening. But we ought to be paying attention to what people, I think, say when they vote. And I hope that Republicans and Democrats. It doesn't mean that needs to continue to be this continual divide. I hope we work together and hope we find solutions to problems. And I do think that the best, opportunity for a person to be reelected if they're already in office is to do their jobs well, and that generally means, certainly in the Senate, where it takes 60 votes to do something, it means that you're going to work together with other people to try to get a result. Results are not often. I'll talk about this whenever we get to veterans issues, but it seems to me that too often we do things that are introducing pieces of legislation, and we have a press conference and we announce the legislation, but we don't always get those bills passed. We get the credit for the event,
right?
But we don't follow through and actually get the legislation passed, and that's just the first step. The other part I would say is the American people also deserve that the legislation has been implemented and is working, and we're paying attention to those things. So a message from the election, from my perspective, is that Americans ought to come together. They ought to work to solve problems, and a lot of people feel like we haven't been doing that.
Just last question on the Trump transition. What do you think of his appointments so far? Everyone is talking about Pete Hegseth to head the Pentagon. What's your view of Mr. Hegseth?
I pay a lot of attention to defense issues. I'm a defense appropriator, and I look forward to having a conversation and about his confirmation. But I would tell you that I've worked with Pete, with the nominee, on veterans issues over a long period of time, and he's been very helpful, and we have a good relationship. And so I'm very pleased to what I know about him and my past experience in working with him, and I look forward to that conversation.
You are the longest, and this is a great factoid, longest serving lawmaker on Veteran Affairs Committee, going all the way back to the House to 1996. That was a year before I came to Washington. That's a long time. What have you learned from all those?
You should be politer than to say that's what you just said.
Well, I'm killing myself too.
There is no, I'm not a veteran, which is perhaps to my detriment in my relationships with those who advocate for them. But I was in high school at the time the Vietnam War was coming to an end. If you were a year older than me, certainly 2 years older than me, you served in Vietnam. And I saw how my own high school classmates were treated upon their return, saw how Americans were treated upon their return on the news. And just as a 16-year-old kid, I'm saying, this isn't right, and I'm going to do everything I can to pay my respect, express my gratitude, and try to compensate for what I saw. And so when I came to Congress, there was nothing that would suggest I was going to be in Congress, so I never envisioned the rest of this. But I asked to serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee. When I came to the Senate, I asked for the same thing. In the House, I chaired the subcommittee that was responsible for health care issues for veterans. We don't have subcommittees in the Senate. And I was the chairman of the Veterans Committee once before for about a year upon the departure of Johnny Isaacson. And then I've been the ranking member under Senator Tester, or beside Senator Tester, and now potentially become the, I wouldn't want to leave any doubt about that, become the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee.
I think you're going to be chairman. Congratulations. Let's talk about what will be the agenda. Obviously, this committee operates more in a bipartisan fashion than most.
We have, and we do, and I certainly, I think my reputation would suggest that would be the case, at least my efforts as we go into the new year and the new Congress. And of all places that we should be bipartisan, it would be the Veterans Affairs Committee. And there are very few issues that really should divide us on partisan lines. And I say, the agenda is continuing to do many of the things that we've already done. And I would go back to what I said earlier, implementation. The PACT Act was a great success. It can be even a better success. It all depends upon its implementation. And we need to be providing the oversight that is necessary to make sure the department does things right. My general focus on issues on veterans in the Veterans Affairs Committee really revolves around what you would call, as a member of Congress, casework. And that is what I know about what's going on in veterans' lives, certainly is from the witnesses and the testimony and the hearings that we have, but it really comes from home. When I meet somebody, they stop me, they tell me what's going on in their life. I visit VA hospitals. We have 3 VA hospitals in Kansas. I visit them on a frequent basis, outpatient clinics, CBOCs. But mostly it's just the mail, the emails and conversations. And I just was, of course, at Veteran Day event, and the stories that people tell me about where they're not getting what they need or where they're slipping through the cracks is really where we focus. And one of the things that it is difficult to change the VA broadly, and one of the satisfactions that come from what I do or what most of us do in regard to veterans is pretty frequently we can solve a veteran's problem. But when you solve a veteran's problem doesn't mean you solve the problem for everybody else who may very well have a similar kind of problem that the veteran that's talking to me has. And so the question is, how do you turn making this circumstance better, not just for the person who happened to run into me or happened to have the fortitude to call and write and seek out our staff, but then the person who didn't do that gets left behind because we just solved one problem, one case, one person at a time. And that's a great thing, and it gives you satisfaction. But we need to be able to change the system so that if there's a problem that's here, you address it, you address everybody else's problem. But our agenda will, again, be implementation of acts. I mean, I am an author of the Mission Act. It's one that I care a lot about. And it's perhaps in part because of when I was a congressman in the House, being a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, I represented a congressional district the size of the state of Illinois. There is no VA hospital in that congressional district. And so distance, the rural nature of Kansas, the rural nature of many places in the country, lend me to be very interested in finding ways for veterans to access care at home or closer to home. And so Mission Act will be front and center. It's one of the, we've had challenges, in my view, with the Department of Veterans Affairs in the way they interpret it, and they've had overt and covert, at least what I see, as trying to reduce the role that the Mission Act plays in veterans' lives. And I want to make sure that the law is followed. Not that they do something that is too much the other way, not trying to privatize the VA, but do not have a bias against community care if the veteran chooses community care. And in that Mission Act, it says one of the ways you can get care in the community is if it's in your best interest. Best interest defined by you and your provider. And that's not a decision for somebody at the Department of Veterans Affairs to make. It's a healthcare issue to be decided by a veteran and his or her provider. We were involved in the John Q. Hannon Act, mental health. I heard a bit of what was said before I arrived. I mean, I think a main issue that we face in that regard is just the lack of healthcare professionals, mental health care professionals. And we can have all kinds of programs and policies, but unless we have people to fill the positions. And so, I mean, we'll just work our way through, and we'll have hearings. I'll be talking to my Republican colleagues. I'll be talking to my Democratic colleagues about what their agenda, what they want to see on our committee. We'll be talking to the veteran service organizations. We'll be talking to veterans at home in Kansas. And that agenda will evolve over based upon what we hear. But I also can tell you that most recently, I mean, we got consumed by trying to fix the budgetary issues for the PACT Act. The VA claimed that they were $3 billion short, and if we didn't get it fixed, veterans would not receive their benefits in the 1st of September. It turns out that they miscalculated. It wasn't right. There wasn't a problem. They didn't need the money. They still indicate there's $12 billion in healthcare needs of veterans that are unmet. But we need to make sure that they justify, verify, and certainly we've insisted that they explain how they got in this position of underestimating their budget. You could spend your whole time on the Veterans Committee trying to get the VA's administration to work better.
Who is going to be your counterpart? Obviously, Senator Tester lost his re-election bid. Who's going to be the ranking member to your chairmanship?
I don't know. We have a long line, of course, of Democrats on the other side of that aisle. The one that the first three, I think, have already either they may have served. I don't know that they're termed out. I don't know exactly what the Democratic rules are, but they're going to be chairmen, in this case, ranking members of other committees. So I think you get to Senator Blumenthal at the place in which this conversation first starts, and it become an understanding, which I don't have, of the rules of the Democratic caucus about how many ranking member positions he could have. And then you work your way. I think Senator Hirono is next. I think perhaps the least senior. And incidentally, we're losing two really good members of the Veterans Committee on the Democratic side, Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin. I wish they were there. But I think maybe the end maybe is Angus King, who again, even if you got to that point in seniority on the Democratic side of our committee, Angus King would be a great ranking member as well.
It is complicated, but you think that it'll be, regardless of the changes, the bipartisanship will continue?
Every intention on my part is to see that that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, Senator, I know you've got a big day. Thank you for joining us. Please thank the Senator for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much, Senator. Well done. Well done. Oh, no, that's fine. Well,
Thank you all.
Please welcome Eric Eversole, Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Hiring Our Heroes.
hey, Eric, how are you?
Great to see you.
Hey, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Round of applause. Very nice. Well deserved. So tell us about your nonprofit, its mission, and where it goes from here.
Yeah, so Hiring Our Heroes is a national grassroots organization that was created when there was a crisis in veteran unemployment back in 2011. We had a lot of young service members coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan right on the heels of the Great Recession, and they had an awful time finding a job. And in fact, for veterans under the age of 25, just a little over 11 years ago, the unemployment rate was 30%.
30, wow.
And so organizationally, the chamber created Hiring Our Heroes to really leverage our state and local chambers to help those unemployed veterans and local communities find meaningful careers. But as we started to tackle unemployment, we really started to shift our focus to the transitioning population. We really wanted to prevent service members from simply going home and becoming unemployed. How do we change the transition process? So much like college campus recruiting, how do we connect those service members with jobs before they leave that military installation?
And those programs, did they exist before 2011?
Well, they existed locally on military installations.
But that was not nationally.
But it wasn't nationally. And so think about it from any of your colleges. If the college only served the local community, that created missed opportunities for a lot of service members, 70% of whom would go back to another location away from the base. And so what the chamber was able to really do was bring in that national coalition of companies with jobs across the country, start to treat transition like college campus recruiting. And we've seen massive sea changes in how service members now find jobs. And again, we've seen great unemployment rates that are lower than their peers in the civilian population.
What are the numbers now, roughly?
They're about 3%. They've been 3% for 6, 7, 8 years. And it's been a big change. But, you know, our work is far from over. A lot of service members are still suffering from underemployment. As you were talking with Representative Moulton about the challenges with transition, it's not just about finding a service member a job. It's about finding a transitioning service member and military spouses jobs that provide purpose and provide meaning and leverage all their incredible skill sets. And that's really the problem right now is we can get them a job, but if we're not taking advantage of their tremendous skill sets from a business community perspective, then we're missing out on a tremendous opportunity.
What are some of the success stories that really kind of have lifted you up and told other people about that, hey, this is why you should hire a veteran?
Well, you know, there's kind of a couple sides of that. We're seeing companies, Fortune 50 companies, that are creating incredible teams to recruit veteran talent into their companies. They're doing amazing work on that front. And that's uplifting to see because it didn't exist 10 years ago. But on the service member side, I think we have to think about these young service members through two lenses. One, where did they come from originally? And a lot of these young service members come from lower and middle income families. They're blue collar families. Student Veterans of America will tell you that when they decide to use their GI Bill, 2/3 of them are going to be first generation college students. And so these are amazing young men and women who are pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, looking for economic opportunity, but they come from backgrounds that don't necessarily understand how to leverage their skill sets in 21st century economic opportunity. So that's a lot of what we do organizationally is really help them open their aperture as to what opportunity looks like in this country, where does it exist, what does a pathway look like, and why, because of their background, their leadership, their resilience, their problem-solving skills, they are a model of what the 21st century workforce needs to look like, especially as the workforce changes as a result of AI.
What do you think, speaking of AI, what do you think that would mean for veterans?
I think it's a tremendous opportunity for veterans. We have to remember with AI is that there is the technical component of it, right? What the machine is doing, but it's the human element that's going to distinguish companies that leverage AI well and ones who don't. And service members, more so than I think any population in America, understand something that machines don't, which is nuance. You think about that combat veteran that is in, trying to decide whether somebody is trying to hurt them or their teammates based on intelligence. And being able to analyze it and say, yes, this is a threat, we have to eliminate it, or someone who says, no, that's just a person in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the consequence of that decision is life and death often. And so being able to keep perspective and the nuance is something that service members are trained to do from day one. Their critical thinking is important. But I'll tell you the other thing that I think is really important for our veterans and businesses who hire veterans. The half-life of a skill set now is about 4 years. It's actually changing very quickly. It used to be 10 years ago, it was 10 years.
Give me an example of that. So
IT, Python, as an example. The shelf life of those skill sets used to be 10 years 10 years ago. It's now 4 years and trending towards 2 years. And so the adaptability, the willingness to constantly learn is emerging as this incredible skill set that companies, they want people with the backgrounds and the critical thinking, but they understand that they can train people and they're going to have to train people to keep up with the technological change that's going to occur.
And do you see service members, veterans embracing that? I mean, because we have a changing economy, as you mentioned, so you've got to have that retraining of the workforce. Yeah. It's a big problem for this country as a whole.
Yes, it's a huge problem for the country as a whole, and I think we have to remember that. This is not just isolated to veterans. It impacts underrepresented populations across this country, and we have to get this right if we really want to build the workforce of the future. But veterans are seizing the opportunity. They like the pace at which change is occurring. Unlike most Americans who may be a little bit afraid of change, veterans are embracing that change. They're leveraging their skill sets. They're leveraging their ability to impact their community. They're leveraging the willingness to help lead the next generation of workers in this country, and I think that's really powerful.
How do you get the word out, other than speaking at events like these, both to veterans and the employment community, businesses, of this is a great program, you need to get involved?
Yeah, here's what I would tell you. I don't have to tell too many companies that they should hire veterans.
Okay. I get it.
13 years ago, yes, I had to tell people, like, here's the benefits.
Right.
That doesn't happen anymore. The real challenge that companies face, and this is going to be true both for veterans and other populations, is when somebody's resume starts to look different than someone else's, and when that skill set is based on something that's really hard to capture on paper, like leadership and resiliency, it's really hard to evaluate whether that talent's going to be a good fit in your company or not. It's really difficult, and companies are struggling across the country. They're talking about skills-based hiring. Many of them are not doing it incredibly well, but they're trying. That's why programs like the Department of Defense Skill Bridge program, which creates internship opportunities for active duty service members, is so critical, because it allows that service member to go in for 12 weeks, show their skill sets, let the company evaluate it. We run the nation's largest Skill Bridge program. We put 2,500 active duty service members through that program. 85% of them or more are getting hired within 3 months of leaving active duty, and the average salary is $115,000. It works.
Wow.
And importantly, they're choosing jobs for the right reason. Their retention rate is more than 2 years after service. So it's really a powerful program. The program itself, though, creates challenges for the Department of Defense due to retention and recruiting issues, because that person, when they're doing their internship and setting themselves up for their career, is away from their unit, and that hurts mission readiness.
As far as what you think policymakers can do at the state, federal level, we obviously have a new Congress, 119th Congress, going to be sworn in January. What would you like to see them do, but also at the state level too?
Well, we have to figure out Skill Bridge. I mean, that's critical. Right now it's putting commanders in a bad position between deciding between mission readiness and somebody's long-term career economic opportunities. That's unfair to commanders. Second, we have to tackle this military spouse unemployment issue in this country. Yep. It is a huge problem for service members. If you look at military families, the average American family that's married, 2/3 of them have dual incomes. In the military, it's around 40-45%. Lost economic opportunity for that family. But more importantly for military spouses, it's also the sense of purpose and meaning that careers often provide. And so one of the top issues, and it keeps coming up survey after survey, is the fact that military spouses aren't able to find meaningful employment, and it's causing service members to leave.
How do you attack that problem?
Well, we're seeing some innovative programs like the Military Spouse Career Accelerator pilot that is being run through the Department of Defense. We're collaborating with them on it. Much like SkillBridge, it provides military spouses who often have significant gaps in their resume a 12-week internship opportunity. It's fully funded through a stipend, so the spouse isn't deciding between, keeping food on the table for their families and trying out new opportunities. And much like the other internship programs on the active duty side, we're seeing about an 80% placement rate and strong salaries. They're not as high as the active duty side, but we're seeing some really good progress. And so we need to see more innovative programs like that really make spouse employment a priority. But I will say quickly, Bob, what's really exciting and where there's been a tremendous change is 5 or 6 years ago, we really had struggled to find people up at the Pentagon to talk about the military spouse employment issue. We don't have that problem anymore. I mean, from the chairman, from the secretary on down, they understand how this is impacting readiness and their ability to recruit the next generation, and there's a will to find solutions.
I was talking to the senator a little bit, and he raised the issue of rural and urban as far as job placement. Is this a regional issue? Are there regional problems out there?
It's yes and no. I think that some of the more remote locations, it creates challenges, but even in this military spouse career accelerator pilot we're running or collaborating with DoD on, 60% of those jobs are remote. So they're able to leverage their skill sets. Okay. And so we're trying to think about this from a modern economy point of view and a modern workforce. And to the extent that employers can leverage those remote opportunities for military spouses, then those are the types of opportunities we're taking advantage of.
That's interesting. So has that been a game changer? I mean,
incredible.
Okay.
Because it's not just solving the near-term problem of I'm unemployed, and then 2 years later I'm moving again and I'm unemployed again.
Right.
And then 2 years after that I'm unemployed and looking for another opportunity. These are jobs that they can take with them, and that's really been critical to success. But here's the other thing we're seeing, and I think this has been really great, is that the federal agencies are now really leaning into military spouse hiring as well. And because there are so many federal opportunities on and near military installations, it's creating a tremendous amount of portability, which is going to be critical to solving this challenge as well.
Has that been a recent development, them pushing it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Like within the last 5 years or so?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Well, going back to something you said that you hear a lot when you're talking about veterans, slipping through the cracks. Yeah. What are the cracks? What are the basics, especially for a veteran watching this right now and is seeking answers?
Well, I think that here's where I would tell you where I think we need to do a better job, and then I'll answer where the cracks are, because I don't think, as we have implemented transition programs over the last decade, the Transition Assistance Program in particular, we still don't have any data as to what our service members need as part of the transition.
No data.
No.
Okay.
So, you're going to have a population that simply wants to go home and figure it out. You have a population that are going to leverage the GI Bill. You have a population, married service members, for instance, that has a spouse that hasn't been able to keep a job. The economic pressures on that transitioning service member are actually much greater than the 22-year-old that's going to go stay on mom's couch. So how do we start to create programs that understand what the needs are instead of a one-size-fits-all transition program? And so for a lot of service members, that one-size-fits-all is in fact the crack. It is, they're not getting the service they need. It's drinking out of a fire hose. They say, I'm just going to go home and figure it out. And going home and figuring out is not a plan. It's not a plan. And so we have to do a better job of understanding what their needs are and then stay with them. Some of the benefits like SkillBridge don't exist after you transition off of active duty. So if you're a veteran and you go home and figure it out, well, you've lost that internship opportunity.
Right.
And that creates transition problems too. So we really need to think a little more comprehensive about the transition process, not just as a point in time, but really as a process, so that we can better serve their needs.
Oh, we've run out of time. Please thank Eric for joining us this morning. Thank you so much. Hey, well done, well done.
Please welcome Deputy Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs at the VA, Terrence Hayes.
Hey, Terrence, how are you?
Good to see you, my friend.
Okay, so you've worked at the VA for a while. You were there from what I know from day one of VA Secretary McDonough.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that experience. What did you learn?
Learned a lot. My longevity just says that the boss couldn't find anything else for me to do.
Right.
So, but no, it's been the honor of a lifetime. Being a 20-year Army combat veteran, I believe in veterans taking care of veterans, and being able to serve as the spokesperson for our second largest agency means a lot to me. But most of all, it allows me to be able to have those two-way conversations with our veterans and hear from our veterans, and then take that feedback back to the boss and to our team to actually implement change at VA. And that's what we've been able to do.
As you know, VA issues don't always attract headlines. They're not usually on the front page. Explain that process, how you've worked with the media. And listen, just like in movies, there's got to be conflict for a story, and media likes conflict. And certainly there is conflict sometimes.
Absolutely.
But compared to other agencies, not so much. So what did you learn about working with the media and how they tell the story of what's going on at the agency?
Yeah, Bob, I think what I learned immediately is when I took the job is that, I wanted to sit down and meet with our press colleagues, kind of learn how we could communicate better with them, how we could use them as that platform to engage and educate our veterans. So I sat down with every single one of our national beat reporters, one-on-one. And again, just to build that relationship and sometimes rebuild that relationship. I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish, because prior to us coming on board, we've had 11 secretaries, and this is the first Secretary McDonough, to actually conduct press conferences on a monthly basis to account to the American taxpayer, to account to members of Congress, and of course to account to our veterans. So, and then we've even expanded it even further. Now we have our undersecretaries meeting with the press on a monthly basis. Of course, I chat with the press on a daily basis in my team. So being able to reestablish that relationship was critical in order for us to actually educate our veterans on the great things that we're doing at VA.
Let's talk about the great things you're doing at VA. What are you and the Secretary most proud of?
I think we're most proud that, more veterans than ever before are coming to get their care. And receiving their benefits in VA's history. That should be a barometer of what our success has been. But, as Secretary McDonough says often, our veterans will be the judge of that. But also, until every veteran and survivor has received the benefits that they've earned, we're not going to stop. So our mission is not complete. We are excited about the great things we've done. I know the ranking member mentioned the PACT Act. We are very excited about what the PACT Act has done for veterans and surviving families. But again, there's so much more work for us to do to ensure that every single veteran who was impacted by burn pits, by Agent Orange, by many other toxic substances because of their service receives what's due to them, and quite frankly, what they deserve. So we're going to keep pushing the gas until our last 60 or so days are left to ensure that these veterans are taken care of.
Going to the PACT implementation, that certainly legislation gets the headlines, the implementation less so. How is the implementation going, and where does it go from here?
Yeah, I will say this, that implementation has been going well. I think what a lot of veterans and a lot of the American public doesn't understand about the PACT Act is that it was supposed to be a phased-in approach. And when I say phased in, many of the benchmarks weren't supposed to be hit until 2032 and beyond. President Biden and Secretary McDonough said, no, that's unacceptable. Many of these veterans, and again, our surviving families, have waited entirely too long. So when the president signed the bill into law August of 2022, everything was on deck right then and there. Now, the great thing is that Secretary McDonough and VA had been planning for that, and we anticipated that. So we had mass hirings to where we had the proper clinicians on deck, but also the individuals who adjudicate claims. So we were ready to implement that. Are there hiccups? Of course. Anything that's that large scale is going to have some hiccups along the way. But I'll tell you this, we've been able to deliver more than $7.9 billion in earned benefits in only the first 2 years to a little over 1.3 million veterans and survivors. And we're just touching the surface. And we've had individuals on the claim side of the house who have done record numbers on a daily basis. So we're definitely doing the job. And then we have team members who are volunteering for overtime to ensure that we're getting the benefits to our wonderful veterans as quickly as possible. So we're doing a lot of work. We're very proud of the PACT Act, but again, there's still more work to do.
I want to give you a chance to respond. Senator Moran was talking about the budget shortfall controversy. I know you've taken some media calls on that.
Yes.
Why did that happen? What's the latest on that?
Yeah, I'm not going to get kind of ahead of that. I know we'll be meeting with the senator next week to testify on the Hill on that. So I'm not going to get ahead of that. But again, I'll tell you this, and this is, again, very important for your audience to understand, is that we're going to do everything we can to deliver on that promise of getting the benefits and care that the veterans deserve. And that's what we're doing. We're dedicated to doing that. And we're going to work with our members of Congress to do that, with our veteran service organizations to ensure that we're doing that. And to all those veterans out there, your VA is going to continue to shift how they operate to fit into your lives, so you're not having to fit and adjust your lives into the VA system.
That's a pretty good answer. You've been doing this a while, haven't you? Advice for the next administration is part one of the question. Number two, what do you think the President-elect Trump should be looking for? A lot of speculation, a lot of articles out there. Who could be the next VA secretary? What qualities should that person have?
Yeah, we're going to be getting ready to work with the transition team in the next few days or so.
Okay.
So we're definitely going to have those conversations with those new team members who are going to assume the post at VA. And we're going to just continue to just let them know that the number one thing that they need to do and to ensure that their North Star is everything needs to be veteran-centric.
Okay.
And that's what, again, the Secretary has demanded of us. And we're going to exactly have the same conversations with those team members who are going to transition. So our focus isn't going to change on that. We hope that they continue on the progress that we have done. Again, as the senator and the congressman noted earlier, I think one thing that we can agree to in this town is that veterans issues should be nonpartisan.
Right.
And I think that whoever does assume that post, my prayer is that they continue that mantra and that everything they do focuses on that veteran and that surviving family.
What do you think are three of the biggest problems veterans face now, based upon what you hear via feedback?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with the veterans that I chat with, I think one is just understanding the VA system.
Okay.
Some of them have lost confidence in that system over time. We ran into a Vietnam War veteran who, for years, decades, was denied his benefits. And so when you hear those stories, you're very...
It was just a mistake?
No, it was not a mistake. The system was just very challenging.
Okay, and it just frustrated.
And because of the PACT Act, though,
right,
it eased that burden for us to get to yes for this gentleman.
Okay.
And within months, he was able to receive a 100% disability rating because of the PACT Act. And again, but for 30 and 40 years, he had been denied. But that's one of the challenges, is just navigating this very tough system that many folks aren't really aware of or how to navigate it. That's one of the challenges. Another challenge, I think, from what I've been told from various different veterans, is that, they don't know where to kind of start, especially after they transition, how do I file for my benefits, or how do I enroll in healthcare, or how do I get my GI Bill benefits, or how do I, get a loan, home loan, and that kind of thing. So it's a lot of things that are coming at you, especially when you're going through that transition phase that, you just don't know.
For those questions, obviously the website helps, but what are other resources that people watching can reach out to?
What we're doing right now is we're trying to work earlier with the Department of Defense to educate our individuals who are in service right now.
Okay.
So I think what we've learned.
Was that done before? Not as much, or
not as much? Not as much. I mean, we have I think great transition programs that DoD and the services run, but I think we need to introduce and educate some of what VA has to offer well earlier in the life cycle of a service member. It's not to get them to depart the military, but to educate them and their families on what is available to them when they actually do depart. Again, a lot of things are coming at you in those last stages of your career in uniform. The last thing you want to do is miss some critical pieces on the Veterans Affairs side of the house that's really going to impact you long term. So we're having those discussions with DOD, working with them on a monthly basis to figure out how we can add that into the transition piece much sooner than it is now.
Healthcare is important to everyone, of course,
Absolutely.
but it's especially important for veterans, and the Congressman was talking about mental health challenges. Where do you see the VA healthcare system? Where has it come from, improvements, and where do you think it could improve even further?
Bob, before I took the job, I was not a user of VA healthcare.
Okay.
I came on board, and the first month I'm talking about the remarkable care, and I wasn't a user.
Okay.
And so I had a hospital system. I won't name that system, but what I'll tell you this is when I signed up for my VA healthcare, and the primary care physician and the care team that I have is far superior than the care that I was getting from this other organization. That is exceptional.
Okay.
And I trust my VA healthcare. And what I tell folks is this, is that if you're kind of wondering about how healthcare is right now, give us a shot, give us a call. At least see what you're eligible for. Visit your local VA medical center and see if this is a destination you want to call home ultimately. And then give your primary care physician a try.
Okay.
And then if that does not work, there's avenues to get some folks to help you there. I know the senator mentioned earlier the Mission Act and allowing our individuals to go into the community. I'll tell you this, and this is what the secretary has said time and time again. Whether you're getting your care at VA or in the community, we're going to assist our veterans to get the best outcomes, whether that's under us, under our roof, or under the roof of a community partner. We're not going to withhold any veteran from going into the community. So again, I want to make sure that it's crystal clear to our veterans who are watching today that you're going to work or be able to work with your healthcare team to determine what the best outcomes are for you individually.
So that's a two-step process. Number one, you've got to convince a lot of people to try the system.
Absolutely.
That's number one. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, if they do it, is there any data polling that says, yeah, this is, as you said, this is a really good system. It's better than the old system I was under.
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen these CMS results over the past 2 years, we are far exceeding even our non-VA healthcare systems. And we don't put these surveys out. We don't take the data. This is independent data that's given to us. So there are hospital systems under the VA umbrella that are far exceeding their counterparts in their communities. Are there some systems in the VA system that need to do more work? Absolutely. When you have a system this large, especially an integrated system this large, again, there's going to be some challenges. And we're putting our fingers on fixing those challenges for our veterans. But again, if there are any veterans out there right now who are wondering about VA healthcare, and is it still the VA of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it's absolutely not. Again, we have the absolute best clinicians on deck. We're continuing to recruit the absolute best on deck to ensure that when veterans come to VA, that they are treated properly and they get the absolute world-class care that they deserve.
About a minute left. What did I miss? Anything you want to close with going forward, whether it's bipartisanship in a very polarizing time? And
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think the last thing I'll say is this, again, we have about 2 months left on deck, Bob.
Right.
And I want folks to know that, we have full intentions to continue to work A+ each and every day till January 19th. So I want our veterans to know that there's still some issues that we're delving into that the secretary has at his highest priorities that we're going to have our attention on until our very last day. And we're not going to be satisfied until we actually accomplish those tasks for our veterans who are moving into the future. Again, this is about veterans helping veterans, and this is very near and dear to me. And again, I'm excited for where VA is going to go into the future.
Very nice. Running through the tape, right?
Absolutely.
Terrence, thank you for joining us. Please thank Terrence. Hey, that was good stuff. Well done. Thank you, man.
It is now time for our panel. Please welcome to the stage Lieutenant General Brian T. Kelly, President and CEO of the Military Officers Association of America, Danny Vargas, Chair, CEO, and founder of the American Latino Veterans Association, Allison Jaslow, CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Jennifer Silva, U.S. Army veteran and Chief Program Officer at Wounded Warrior Project, and Cindy Noel, Assistant Director of Field Operations at the VFW's National Veterans Service. Welcome all.
Thank you. Okay, a lot of experts on this panel. Why don't we go down the line? Introduce yourself and your affiliation and what you're passionate about. What's the lead of why you're here today?
Yeah, so Brian Kelly, I am the president and CEO of the Military Officers Association of America. I spent 33 and a half years in the United States Air Force, retired from the position of the Deputy Chief of Staff for Manpower, Personnel, and Services, and has had an opportunity to transition, and this position was open at MOA. I found out that my passion was that MOA's mission has been for 95 years now to preserve and protect the earned benefits. It was great when Eric talked about that earlier, the earned benefits of the military and uniformed services community. Those who are serving, those who have served, our veterans, their families, our survivors. And so the fact that that's MOA's mission and what we do every day really drives me and gives me excitement.
Very nice. Danny?
So I'm Danny Vargas. I'm the founder, chairman, and CEO of the American Latino Veterans Association, also a fellow Air Force veteran myself. I founded the organization because I think it's important to begin to change the narrative and tell the stories of Latino contributions to the military from the Revolutionary War to today, and to help the 1.5 million Latino veterans in our country thrive. We're about 9% of the total veteran population today. By 2046, we'll be 16% of the veteran population. We are right now about 19% of the active duty force, 25% of the Marine Corps, but only 8% of the Officer Corps and less than 3% of the flag officers. So we need to do more to make sure that we're helping that population thrive and telling their important stories.
My name is Allison Jaslow. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. I am a U.S. Army and Iraq War veteran myself. This is the second time I've been in a leadership role at IAVA. I was last at the organization from 2016 to 2018, but I've been CEO since this past March. We are the leading voice and the leading advocacy organization for the post 9/11 generation of veterans. And to your point about what inspires me today is I actually think that one of the great privileges of leading IAVA in this moment that we're in right now is that the post 9/11 generation of veterans are ascendant in America today. You're seeing that on Capitol Hill here in Washington, but also in the private sector. And I think it's a really exciting time for our generation to be in a position to lead when America needs us most.
Great, thanks for having me. Jennifer Silva, I'm the Chief Program Officer at Wounded Warrior Project. I am an Army veteran, served in the 90s, and really what we are passionate about is changing the way that veterans are cared for in this country and ensuring that they have access to the best world-class care. And we also have a big ground game of direct programs to the warriors and families that we serve across the country and internationally. So we have a mix of that plus our advocacy efforts and really being the voice of the wounded, injured, and ill veterans who have served post 9/11. So we're grateful to just be in the fight. I've been there 16 years and I get passionate about that big goal of changing the way that veterans are cared for.
Good morning, everyone. I am Cindy Noel. I am the Assistant Director of Field Operations for the VFW. So I manage the pre-discharge claims representatives who sit on the military bases and process all the pre-discharge claims for active duty service members. I am here because I was one of the people sitting in a TAP class in 2014 when I decided to retire within 7 months because I did not want to go to a military installation where my 8-year-old would be exposed to meth in a military community. And so I decided to retire in 7 months. My, at the time, general said, go see a guy on Andrews Air Force Base. And I went to see a guy, and that guy is now my director at the VFW. And that guy sat down with me and went through every page of my medical records. And he helped me file my VA claim. And after that day, he was like, do you want a job? I was like, no, I just want to go be a mom. And And I decided to become a B2D rep, or a pre-discharge claims rep. And for the past 10 years, I've been serving the community at Camp Lejeune, and I'm now the assistant director managing the team. But essentially, I've just been paying it forward, right? I've been helping active duty service members do what this guy did for me 10 years ago. And that's why I'm here, making certain that when someone is leaving the military, they're prepared, they're ready, and when they leave, they get the benefits they deserve.
Along those lines, and you're all veterans, thank you for your service. Cindy, you mentioned your personal experience. I just want to open up to anyone else and want this to be a free-flowing discussion, so jump right in. But as far as anyone else, their personal experience of being a veteran and how it's helped them do their job now, to understand, yeah, I get it. Not to say non-veterans can't get it, but, well, they don't have the perspective you guys do. Who wants to jump in on that one?
Well, one of the things that we see is that transition from active duty is there's a sense of purpose that is lost, and I want to make sure that even though I served pre-9/11, in my transition I was not in combat. In my transition into the civilian workforce, that loss of purpose was a problem. So what Eric mentioned earlier, that really resonated with me. In ensuring that especially women warriors, we find that they are least recognized for their service, and they have about a 10K pay gap annually. And so we want to make sure that transition, they bring all of those great skills that Eric mentioned to the workforce. They have a great work ethic, they know how to project manage, they know how to forecast, all those things in work as part of a team being the biggest thing. All of us, this is said across the whole space, all of us believe that transition could start earlier while they're in active duty uniform, and then help make sure that transition is really successful, because the nation is better for it when they transition well.
Sorry, Brian, did I?
I'm good.
I served in the Army, but I'll steal a phrase from the Marines: adapt, improvise, and overcome. And I think that building kind of that resiliency in our service members is something that is very valuable these days, where you see disruption everywhere.
Right.
To Jen's point, also melding that with finding a new sense of purpose is definitely important post-service. But I do think that service members have had to endure hardship and also figure out how to come back from it in a way that many of our civilian peers haven't, and is super valuable. It's it's those traits that aren't necessarily on your resume,
right,
but also allow you to deal with the unexpected things that are coming at you in the world today.
Yeah,
right.
The one thing I would add, Bob, I would just say, broaden it out a little bit, right? So we think of veterans, I think we've talked a lot about how important it absolutely is, the transition period, but making a good veteran starts when we start recruiting them for service, right? The entire experience, from the very first time we start their recruiting, how we deal with them while they're serving, how they're led, what the quality of life is for their family, how they transition, how they get VA health care, how they make a final transition. All those things matter in what I call an ecosystem of the community as to how we take care of those folks. And not only is it important from a veteran perspective, but if we think of that ecosystem and how important it is to the nation to have volunteers to serve, the most important thing is that those experiences they have, each of those places, during transition afterwards, are powerful enough for them and positive enough for them. Not that there isn't sacrifice. Military service comes with sacrifice. We all know that. There's going to be. But on balance, if it's positive enough, they're going to recommend to the next person. And when they talk to the kid down the block and they're talking and asking about military service, they're going to tell them about it. When a family member is talking to another family member about what their experience is, it'll become important enough that they say, I recommend you serve, right? And I think that's what becomes really powerful, looking at it as a whole ecosystem, and not just from the transition period, but from the very start to the end, makes great veterans.
Danny, I saw you shaking your head there.
I would add that in addition to resilience and all the other items, it would be a sense of maturity and responsibility. We're asking young people, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, to be responsible for other people's lives and to be responsible for the millions of dollars worth of equipment that's out there, and the intelligence that's gathered and so forth. So there's a lot of responsibility that's gained at a young age that these young people are able to take with them into their civilian lives. But there's also a mission focus. So among the soft skills that we talk about is that ability to work as a team, to be focused on the mission. The challenge, though, comes with when they do transition to civilian careers, that mission focus also has to transition to self-focus, right? At least in the community that I serve, for example, once they do their service and get out, they don't think about their needs. They don't think that it's incumbent upon them to seek out the benefits that they've earned because they've already done their duty and they've served their service. So they need to transition not just that mission focus, but also focusing on themselves and doing what they need to make sure that they're healthy and that they've accessed the benefits that they've earned.
Cindy?
But this is why having the pre-discharge claims reps on the installations is so important. Because if you leave it up to the individual to exit the military and then think about the benefits afterward, they may never get to it, right? Because let's be fair, let's be clear. People transition for various reasons. They may have a family emergency, they may have a horrible commander, they may have a horrible first sergeant, they may have a horrible experience in the military, and they're like, I just want to get out of here. And so they hurry up, they sit through TAP because it's mandatory, they're not paying attention. Listen, I have sat through TAP classes from start to finish. I've literally sat through it from a Monday through Friday. I've made it my business to sit there and watch the service members, and some of them are paying attention and some of them are not, right? They're absorbing it and they're not. So the ones who are rushing to get out of here, if we don't have someone in there, this is why the VFW is so, pushing the TAP Promotion Act. We need to be in the room. The veteran service officers, we need to be in the room sharing what we do, telling service members to file their claims, telling them about the benefits that are available to them, so that when they transition out, it helps to tamp down on houselessness, right? Food insecurity, because you have someone E4, they're getting out, they may not be able to go back home, right? They don't know how they're gonna eat. They may not be going to school like the congressman said. He went to grad school, but not everybody get a chance to go to grad school, go to college. So we have to make sure before they leave the service, they have an opportunity to get access to these benefits that the VA has for them.
Danny, I just want to go to you as far as Latinos and having a hard time getting benefits. How has that changed, maybe improved, and where do we need to go?
So part of it is cultural, that humility that I talked about earlier, that sense of being focused just on the mission, just on the job, not on yourself. So we have to overcome that. I think the other aspect of it is, the way that you communicate with that population has some nuance to it. You're probably better off communicating with a family member as opposed to directly with the veteran, because they are so humble, but the family member will force them to go in and try to access their benefits. But I do think that it's important that we find ways to be able to engage them in ways that are meaningful. So they over-index in social media, for example, and radio. So being able to communicate with them in the traditional means that the general veteran population may not be as effective with that population. But it's a large and growing population. So as I said earlier, it's going to be 19% of the veteran population by 2046. So we need to be more proactive and intentional about communicating with that population.
Brian, can you talk about an issue that's going to be a problem for a while, recruitment challenges?
Yeah, I think, we've been talking about, so Danny's talking about influencers in the Latino community, but influencers in general are recommending military service. So this is people who have served, people who are serving, your parents, your neighbors are recommending military service to the next generation at alarmingly lower levels than they used to. I think we went from 74% of those who were serving or had served recommending military service to 59% in a 2 or 3 year period. And the idea here of making sure those influencers, our recruiters do a great job,
right,
but the real people who really do a great job are the influencers. And so making sure those influencers had a good experience or visualize a good experience for service is really important. As I was saying before, this idea of it being a complete continuum is important to us. And so one of the things that we're going to do at MOA is we're going to hold a conference that we call Total Force Plus. And this Total Force Plus conference is going to be basically that discussion from beginning to end, from recruiting all the way through veteran care. It's going to have a forum for academia, industry, DoD leaders, VA leaders, our VSO and MSO leaders, our rank and file members out there to come and have conversations about how do we advance solutions so that the experience you have through that entire spectrum is positive, so that you will, when it's your turn, you will tell that next person, yes, you should join, right? When you become the influencer or your family watches your experience. Now, again, there's lots of potential challenges out there, and we have great organizations who are there to help those folks who are there. But veterans can be thriving as well. They don't. It's not all. We're not all broken, and we're not all those places. But if we are, we've got great organizations and great ways to help them out. But if we do that and bring that ecosystem together, which is why we're going to have this Total Force Plus conference in October of 2025, we think we can start to have the conversations that change the influencers, so that they will start recommending military service at a higher rate again, and now your retention, your recruiting will go back up.
Along those lines, anyone else want to jump in as far as getting the word out, what Brian said, holding conferences, having events like this, but you have a legacy media that's becoming less and less important. Kids, including mine, get a lot of their news on TikTok. How do your organizations get the word out, and how has that changed, and how is that going to change over the next 5-10 years, Allison?
For recruitment?
Yeah.
I'd say a couple of things. One, first, I'm a big believer in the fact that the cultural zeitgeist in America drives a lot.
Yeah.
So it would be great if we were still in the era where everybody's grandfather served, but we're not anymore. But if Hollywood puts out more Top Gun Mavericks, recruitment will, it makes military service look sexy, right?
Is that? Do you see the movie Sideways? I was in Napa Valley, and they said after Sideways came out, sales of Merlot went way down because the character hates that Merlot. Right. But I mean, is it that powerful that you see the numbers just pop when something like that hits?
I mean, I'm not working over the Pentagon, but I do think it's helpful. And if you ask people in the Department of the Air Force, they actually did see a spike when Top Gun Maverick came out in recruitment. It makes it more real. If you didn't grow up in a military community or a part of a military family, you're just very disconnected from the experience. You don't, it's the old saying, you can't be what you can't see, right? And so if you don't see it, then you can't envision it as a career path for yourself. But to your point also about TikTok, we are very proud to be a partner of TikTok right now. We launched our specific TikTok account last November, last Veterans Day. And I think if you want to really meet people where you're at, it's important for our advocacy work. But I was actually joking with the folks at TikTok. I was like, if we're out there and IAVA is making being a vet, military service cool because of the population that is TikTok first, if you will, we'll actually probably help the military with their recruitment, issues, because they'll be seeing content from vets about military service in their news feeds in a way that could actually help the Pentagon as they're also debating sort of the national security risks of TikTok, et cetera.
Jennifer, what do wounded warriors need? You talked about access before. Expound upon that maybe people don't realize. And one of the things that I want to get from this panel is kind of when you see public officials or policymakers, what do you want them to get that maybe they don't get?
Well, we're grateful to have been really investing heavily in mental health care from the get-go. We consider ourselves as a stopgap in filling in gaps where the VA may have some issues getting them access to care. First of all, we believe that it should be really great world-class care. And I think that is provided both in the VA and outside the VA within our Warrior Care Network and other providers. And we need to strike when the iron's hot. When a veteran raises their hand and says, I'm ready to get treatment, I'm ready to get some help, we need to be ready and agile. And that's what I mean by access. So standards that help, especially in areas like our RTP, residential rehabilitation treatment programs, where it's a tough case, and we need to be able to get them into those treatment programs within 48 hours or whatever the standard is, and make sure there's clarity across the enterprise. Those are some things that we find that are very important, and the VA can't do it alone, we can't do it alone. We have a very big investment in direct mental health care, but it could be light. Maybe the warrior or the family member needs some light mental health care, some adjustment things. But then when they need that acute care, we need to make sure as a community we know where to go, we know how to get them access to care. Oftentimes it is working with their spouse or their caregiver, and getting it as a friendly option
Right.
into that. And one of our approaches is we have a lot of connection programs. Get them in, have trust built, and then kind of get to know them, interview them, motivationally interview them, and then get them into the care that they need. We serve a population, over 90% of the warriors that we serve are using VA healthcare. And so we are a true partner with the VA in that, ensuring that when we have programs that are appropriate for them, we're also advocating for them to go back and use the VA as well.
Anyone else want to jump in as far as VA healthcare? Terrence obviously talking about how the program is great, and there have been a lot of comparisons GAO has done to other healthcare programs, and it does rate very well.
Yeah.
But maybe Cindy, what do you think, and what do you think it could be enhanced?
I think what I see dealing with the active duty community as they're transitioning out, a lot of service members, when they're going through specifically TAP class, you know, they're taught to register. However, a lot of times they don't. And so when they transition out, they reach back to us as their VSOs, and they're like, well, what do I do about healthcare? And we're like, well, you have to register. So we walk them through going into their local VA clinic, taking their DD-214 with them, and registering for healthcare. Oftentimes, the service members, they're thinking, well, I don't have a disability rating, so I can't have VA healthcare, and that's not true. You know, you served, you can walk in, you can register. And I tell them, even if the person at the front desk in the VA clinic may not know the correct information, call me back, right? Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, listen, ask to speak to someone else. So a lot of time it's misinformation. Sometimes I actually got an email from a captain. I did his claim, and he's like, what do I do about TRICARE? Sir, you know, there's no more TRICARE. So a lot of times service members are transitioning out and they do not have the right information. So I had to let them know, you get VA healthcare, but guess what? He's overseas. He's now living in Switzerland. So that's a whole nother thing that has to open up, because he has VA healthcare, but now you have to introduce the VA foreign medical program that he now has to battle with, because he is not going to be able to get treatment for some things that he may not be service connected for. So VA healthcare works if you have the information, if you know how to walk through the process. And I share with transitioning service members, you get more bees with honey than vinegar.
Right.
So don't walk in there screaming and yelling at anyone. Just be kind and ask the right questions.
Right.
And so that's my job, and the VDD, our pre-discharge team's job, is to say, listen, here are the questions you need to ask. And our job, our goal, you know, the VFW, we just try to walk everyone through this transition process, because guess what? This is the first time, and it's probably going to be the last time that everyone is going to do this, and we're going to walk you through it. We're going to, you know, make sure you do it right.
Mm-hmm. Hey, but one of the things about VA healthcare, I think, and I was really pleased to hear Senator Moran talk about the PACT Act and talk about it was good that we did, but now you actually have to deliver on all the things that are there. One of the things that we've been trying to work on at MOA, and we've been partnered with the Disabled American Veterans, DAV folks, is, so how do you take what we did in the PACT Act, but make sure that you're improved on it for the next time? And so we created this blueprint called Ending the Wait. If you looked at, it was 31 and a half years between exposure to care. That's too long. That's way too long, right? And so how do you reduce that time frame down? And how do you make sure that the next exposure, that we don't have to wait another 31 and a half years, and you have a blueprint, you have a way to go through and make sure that that timeline is put down, and that the VA healthcare, who's doing a great job on the PACT Act, is prepared for the next thing, right? So you don't have to wait for Agent Orange and whatever that's going to be. And can you give DOD some formulas and ways to make sure that they're prepared when they have exposures, which they're going to have, to make sure the next group of people are there. And so when the 119th Congress gets in place, we're going to be working with Senator Moran and everybody else on how do you take what we did in the PACT Act and now blueprint it forward to make sure you can prevent things from lasting 31 and a half years before you get care next time.
Danny, I want to ask you, we're in Washington 1 week from the election. Latinos moved convincingly toward Trump. Without getting into too much of the politics of it, but what do you make of that? Because this is a demographic that is so important in the country, right, and it's growing, as you mentioned earlier, right, and now it's becoming politically more powerful. And what's the meaning of all that?
Well, I would say one thing, the
there is no single Latino community in the country. It's a very diverse community, 23, 24 different countries of origin, but it's also not monolithic. Right, so lots of different views, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and they will sway depending on the candidate, depending on the issues that are top of mind at the moment. But I also think that it's important that we find ways to be able to address the issues that are of concern, not just during the upcoming election, but year-round. Right? There are too many instances where parties and candidates and campaigns will swoop in September and try to capture a portion of that vote. No, it's not going to work, and I think parties are beginning to learn that it's got to be a year-round engagement, not just outreach. Right? There's a difference. And so I think the results of this past election will prove that that level of engagement is not just beneficial, it's essential for any future elections. And I think that we're driven primarily by the economy. I think that's, at the end of the day, it's the price of eggs and those kitchen table type issues. But I will say, going back to the previous question in terms of the VA, I think the VA does a great job communicating with folks that are already part of the system.
Right.
The challenge are the folks that are sort of untethered to the system, which is a portion of my population. And to Cindy's point, once they get out, to try to get back in and access those benefits is more challenging. It's incredibly cumbersome. So there's got to be a better way of being able to make it easier to be able to get through the system. It's a system of attrition in many cases, and too many veterans just give up. You know, after the first denial, the second denial, they're like, I'm done. Right. And we've got to figure out a better way to do that.
Allison, as far as we're in a very changing, evolving world, especially with AI, combat has changed a lot since when you served in Iraq. I mean, where are we going from here? We have foreign policy challenges around the globe, and I was mentioning earlier that, like, yes, Trump got elected mostly because of domestic issues, but the foreign policy challenges are great, and that obviously has a huge effect on recruitment as well as veteran care.
Well, to your point about how warfare is changing, I mean, just over the last couple of decades, you know, when I was on ground in Iraq, we went through probably 3 or 4 different iterations of body armor and also, you know, technology that helped scrambled IEDs and IED triggers in just a year's worth of time. It is, you know, the warfare has transformed ever since in a way that Brian is way more intelligent on than I am because he was recently in the Pentagon. But it's, you know, it's wild that you can actually have somebody who is a UAV pilot serving in Tampa Bay right now who can execute and neutralize terrorist threats in the Middle East. So, you know, that is a fundamentally different environment that we're operating in right now.
Right.
And I think it also comes with, like, unique challenges. You know, our generation of veterans have deployed over and over again in ways that other generations didn't. You know, you also have, I'll give you a good example. You have the UAV pilot who is told that there's a threat somewhere, and then CNN reports that it wasn't a terrorist. It was a dad and his children. And the mental health implications of somebody carrying out their duty and finding out, regardless of the great intelligence that we have, that they unintentionally impacted an innocent civilian's lives, like, that is not only just a unique challenge, but it's also a very isolating challenge that UAV pilot is dealing with, and also dealing with at their home while it's being litigated in the national news media. So there are things like that that are still, you know, I think, dynamics that we have to continue to watch, at least when it comes to what the warfighter is experiencing throughout all of this. You know, in addition to just the impact of multiple tours on especially the special operations community. The last thing I would say is, you know, I think one of the things that's very important to our members and is a priority for our organization right now is we are fighting terrorism right now under authorizations of military force that have been left open-ended since 2001 and 2002. I think most of our members are not doves by any mean, but they do believe that Congress has a responsibility towards those who are serving today and their families to appropriately debate and authorize when they're sent into harm's way. And I think it doesn't get enough attention, but there are troops in Iraq and in Syria right now who are deployed under a authorization of military force that was passed after 9/11 to authorize the Afghanistan war. And we all know the state of the Afghanistan war right now. So I'll leave it there.
Anyone else want to jump in on that as far as like revising 20-year-old laws?
Yeah, I will not jump in on the law piece, but just to highlight what Allison was talking about on the changing on the warfare and how it changes to the healthcare piece. That example that she was going through with the UAV pilot, right? So think about the UAV pilot, as she said, who in today's battlefield is in combat, literally in combat. But not only are they home, they have to watch the TV, they go home to their family that night. They have to integrate back with their family in their home that very night. So the mental health challenges, the stress challenges are different, but and the stress of, are you considered the same level of warrior if you were doing it from the desert in Nevada as you were if you were in the streets in Baghdad? That is a big mental health issue, and it is something we're going to have to start wrestling with as we do more AI stuff, as we do more info warfare, as we do more UAV things, and something that we'll have to watch as our VSO and MSO organizations dealing with the VA and how they deal with the health issues that those folks have might be a little bit different than what was before.
Congressman Mouton was talking about the mental health challenges he encountered, first presidential candidate to saying, hey, listen, I needed help. Where are we on that? He mentioned that COVID has changed the game. We do a lot of mental health events, and we've seen some real progress, but who wants to jump in on that?
I know that the congressman mentioned the stigma has maybe lessened. I would have to disagree.
Okay.
Just because I'm at Camp Lejeune, right? And we're seeing people, we're talking to service members every day, and whether it's someone who, a junior enlisted or a junior officer, all the way up to a senior enlisted or a senior officer, they are still hesitant to relay any mental health challenges. They are still hesitant to relay the fact that they have been exposed to IED blasts numerous times, not just once, twice. They're still referring to it as, I just got my bell rung. Or they're just saying, oh, this happened, or it was just a little bit of something. And even as you hear, as part of a retention tool, sometimes mental health specialists will refer to as stress related to work instead of calling it post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's a lot of different varying things that, apply to the stigma, or the culture hasn't changed as yet, right? And so I think there's a long way to go to where we get service members to be able to speak to what's going on without affecting their careers on a long-term basis. And until that specifically changes inside DOD, we'll see more people transitioning out of the military, hesitant to say what's actually going on with them, and VA won't be able to treat them the way that they should, because it still exists today. It's 2024, people are still struggling. Same thing with service members who experience military sexual trauma. They're still afraid to say what's wrong, what happened. And it's both men and women. There's a stigma that it's mainly women who experience these things. And so I hear what he's saying. I heard him earlier, but I promise you today, as we deal with active duty service members transitioning and filing VA claims, they're still hesitant to talk about mental health concerns.
Allison, and then actually, you want to start and jump in right there? Yeah.
Okay. I would say that we have a very large investment in mental health care, and we see great work being done both within the VA and in the community. But there's a national shortage of mental health providers, and so we have to, in my opinion, the space needs to embrace access to great care, but also having agility with how care is delivered and where it is delivered. We find that a lot of the warriors that we serve do talk about it, and they are willing to share their story. The sooner that they can share their story and another warrior sees themselves in that story, then it goes to what you were talking about with the stigma. It's like, okay, I see myself in that person, I'll get to help. But I would say The VA Careers Act is helpful in terms of getting the proper pay for those professionals to choose serving veterans as their career path. But it's not just a veteran problem, it's a national problem. But I think there's actually a ton of innovation that's being done within our Warrior Care Network, where we're looking at how to be more precise with the care. They get a year's worth of care in 2 weeks. That type of innovation in lots of other organizations are doing very innovative things as well. It needs to be embraced as the entire way that we serve veterans. That's what I think.
Go to Allison and then Danny.
Well, I was just going to make a couple of points. One, I think it's yes and. I think the congressman got out as a company grade officer as I did, and if this, it's possible that the stigma has changed for our generation, but until our generation is in the top of the leadership in DoD, can they culturally change the entire organization? So it just takes time. The other thing I would say too is I remind people, especially lawmakers, that the military is 85% male, and it's not beta males who are signing up to join the military. And so you can destigmatize it all you want, but people who are tough, who've survived combat in many cases, I think it's just hard to accept on a very human level that you might be struggling in that way. And I just think that that's normal. And so it's possible that we could have also destigmatized it, but destigmatized it for other people, but not ourselves. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which doesn't mean that it can just be hard for anybody, and myself included, who've dealt with mental health challenges. It can just be hard to just accept at a basic level that is a struggle that you're having, Right.
I was just going to dovetail directly off of that. I mean, it's the stigma that's associated not just with the system or with the community, but also oneself. In my community, we've got to face the double stigma of not just, veterans and military members that are stigmatized by reaching out and asking for help, but within the Montreux community that I serve, getting them to the point where they can raise their hand and say, I don't feel right. There's something going on. Getting them to that point is a challenge, and that leads to other issues. That leads to substance use disorder. That leads to domestic abuse. That leads to a whole host of other pathologies that are manifesting themselves in ways that our communities need to be able to address. There's a practical element to it too, that making sure that clearances are not denied as a result of seeking out mental health services. For those that are seeking civilian careers in the intelligence community. So there's a lot of practical matters. We know that every time we see a jobless veteran, that's awful. Every time that there's a homeless veteran, that's horrible. But every time a veteran takes his or her own life because they didn't access the mental health services that they needed, that's a national tragedy. We need to do better.
As far as one thing I wanted to talk about, and Cindy, I liked your anecdote about having to tell people, hey, this is what's going on, because we've all called customer service for a variety of reasons, and they say, go to the internet. And a lot of veterans are older. My family, they don't know how to use the internet, and they click on the wrong thing, and they get hacked all the time. Especially if they're older. And how do you reach them? Especially, Danny mentioned substance abuse. How do you reach that withdrawn? It's not an easy question, but withdrawn veteran who's, he's suffering from loneliness, substance abuse. How do you reach that person? Maybe that person's in their 70s or 80s. Any thoughts from anyone on that?
I think that's difficult because, listen, I call my 23-year-old my IT support, right? and
mine's 25.
And I just figured out how to screen share, and so she's like, push the button, which one? And so thankfully I have IT support, and IT support walks me through how to do things on the phone. But with the VFW specifically, thank God we have our posts at our local posts, and older veteran can walk into one of our older posts and they find that camaraderie. They can, whether it's they see steak night, they can drive over, they can drive in, and they're going to be welcomed in, and they can enjoy a steak, they can enjoy a cup of coffee, and just get what they're missing, right? And to try to do away with that loneliness and get someone who's going to talk to them about all the old war stories, and it goes on and on and on, trust me. And so, and it's a good feeling. And and sometimes that's what you need, because they're going to find someone they can go on a walk with, they're going to sit down and read the newspaper with still, and they don't have a phone in front of them. And so that's what we provide. It's a nice, soft place to land, not just for the older generation, but for the young guy who misses it. I remember a friend of mine retired as an EA, and he was like, Cindy, don't you miss this? And I was like, no, I don't. And I was ready to transition, but I was looking at him like, what's wrong with you? But VFW is for someone like him. EA kind of probably thought he was going to make it to the E9 and didn't, but needed something else, right? And that's what VFW provides. Anywhere USA. I went to Korea for work, and I went to the VFW at Camp Humphreys, Osan Air Base. It was one outside the gate, and they were talking about military stuff. And I was standing there like, oh, y'all guys, you really do this? And so that's what that's for.
There's another aspect, but I hope the new administration will keep this at the VA. And Allison, I know you know, but they have this chief experience office at the VA, right? And so one of the premises that it recognizes is connecting and getting information to the different groups is not a one-size-fits-all, right?
Okay.
That you have different, the discussion that you have with the 80-year-old at the VFW is different than the discussion that Allison has with a 25-year-old at the IAVA, right? And so their grade, their report card is based on what is the experience for somebody who connects with VA? What is the experience for a 25-year-old looking for how they get their benefits? What's the experience for a 50-year-old? What's the experience for a 58-year-old? What's the experience for a 70-year-old and an 80-year-old? But understanding and recognizing that they're not a one-size-fits-all, that you have to go for different methods, different ways to communicate and get information to all those different sources, I think is really powerful, right? I think it's the chief experience officer and holding the chief experience officer accountable for recognizing what is the experience of the person connecting to the VA is something that really, I think, it's leaped them forward a little bit, and I hope they continue to do forward going.
Well, give you the last word.
Yeah, one final point. Jen made a reference to this earlier, but I'm a big proponent in educating the people who love veterans. So children, caregivers, et cetera, especially because when they find their moment of powerlessness, they might not have the information that they need. But if their kid does, or if their kid can say, like, Dad, you need to get help. Like, those are the people who can help the veterans the most. And so educating that population is as important as trying to get information to the veterans.
That's a very good point. Very good point. We have run out of time. Please thank our excellent panel for a great conversation. Hey, thanks, Brian. Yeah, it was well done. Well done.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks to all our wonderful speakers. On behalf of The Hill and our sponsor, Airlines for America, we'd like to thank everyone who joined us here in person and those of you who tuned in online. If you missed any portion of today's discussion, the full event video is available on thehill.com. Thank you very much. Thank you to all who have served, and have a great rest of your day.